You think you know this song because Bing Crosby made it famous, but you don't. It was actually written during the 13 most terrifying days in U.S. history. The songwriter's backstory is darker than most people realize. It was shaped by fear and uncertainty during that time, and it certainly involved the past personal trauma that he had faced. I'm going to tell you the real story behind the song, and I promise, once you know it, you'll never sing it or hear it the same way again. Saturday, November the 24th, 1963. It's 2 days after John F. Kennedy's assassination. The country's in shock, in disbelief, and anger. And later that afternoon, at 12:20 in the afternoon, November 24th, Kennedy's assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, was being transported from one jail to another jail, and he was murdered on live TV. And this became the overwhelming lead story of November the 24th. But later that evening, Bing Crosby, whose name is synonymous with Christmas, walked into the NBC studios in Burbank, California. In 1962, Noel Regney, a 40-year-old musician, was asked by a record producer to write a Christmas song. Now, he'd never written a Christmas song before, and he really wasn't warm to the idea initially. He was pretty discouraged by the commercialism that he believed that had crept into the Christmas holidays. This is in 1962. And as he's strolling through the streets of New York City in October of 1962, there's a sense of despair in the air, a sense of uncertainty. And that's because the United States was in the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a 13-day standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Soviets had placed nuclear missiles in Cuba. They were now pointing at the United States. They were 90 miles off of our coast. And at this time, there's fear and panic that's sweeping across the United States. There's complete uncertainty whether or not the United States is going to get drawn into a war. Grocery stores in some parts of the country are overwhelmed. People are stockpiling food. If the Soviets launched at the United States, there's no question that New York City could be a major target. If Washington, D.C. was targeted, there would only be a 5-minute warning. But as Regney is walking the streets of New York City that day, his mind is likely wandering back to his dark days in France during World War II. Regney hated conflict. He hated war. He knew the destruction and the poverty that war brought. He had experienced it firsthand. He had grown up in France as a teenager in the 1940s. And when the Germans invaded France, he was conscripted and forced to join the German army. In fact, he joined secretly the French underground, which was created to resist the German occupation. And then the boldest thing that Regney did during the war was he led a group of German soldiers right into a direct planned ambush with the French resistance. Now, unfortunately, he got caught up in the crossfire that day and got injured, but there was a lot of bloodshed that he witnessed personally that day. It probably was the most traumatic day of his life, and a day that he never forgot. And so as Regney is walking through the streets of New York City here in October of 1962, with the threat of war hanging in the air, he said, "En route to my home, I saw 2 mothers with their babies in strollers. The little angels were looking at each other and smiling. All of a sudden, my mood was extraordinary." Regney said that he came up with the lyrics for his song in his head. And when he got home, he penned them, and then his wife, who happened to be a pianist and also a composer, sat down with him, and they put the lyrics to music. Now, there's no question that the song is centered around the biblical account of Christ's birth from chapter 2. One phrase says, a star, dancing in the night with a tail as big as a kite." Well, now, the obvious interpretation would be that that is referring to the star that led the wise men to the Christ child. But Regney's daughter Gabrielle Regni, argued that the song had a twofold meaning. She said the star was meant to be a bomb or a missile. In the 1960s, the United States had built intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs. And she said that this is simply referring to an ICBM that is streaking across the sky with a tail as big as a kite. Now, is this really what Regni meant? Is it possible? Yeah, is it possible that he had sort of a twofold meaning at that time? Perhaps. Or is this just simply an imaginative interpretation of his loving daughter? Well, I'll leave that interpretation up to you to decide. But in 1985, Regni did say in an interview that the song was written to be viewed as a song for peace. Because in the song it says, "Pray for peace, people everywhere." Later that evening, Bing Crosby walked into the NBC studios in Burbank, California, to record a segment for the Bob Hope Comedy Hour that was going to be aired later in December. And during that taping, he sang for the first time publicly Regni's song, "Do You Hear What I Hear?"
Do you see what I see? Do you see what I see? A star, dancing in the night.
And after that special aired in December, it sold more than 1 million copies after that first year. Crosby is the one that made this song an instant holiday classic. So now you know the real story of Noel Regni's most famous Christmas song, "Do You Hear What I Hear?"